All right, music fans, welcome. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for a few real people who are left just like you right there, just like me right here. Here's an album that I was talking about the other day. And yes, I was able to order it, and it's kind of hard to find, but it's definitely worth it. This is Ready Eddie by Eddie Money. It was released in 1999 in the super dark period where there was almost zero melodic rock anywhere to be heard. And about 2 weeks ago, Eddie's widow took to Facebook and started blasting Rolling Stone because they're calling Eddie Money really uncool and focusing on the time in his career where he was struggling with substance abuse in the late 70s and early 80s. And Eddie was still putting out great material during that time frame, but record labels are businesses, and if you're unable to promote an album because the artist is personally dealing with issues, they will put their money elsewhere, or at least that's what they used to do. Now everybody is struggling with everything, so it doesn't really matter. They just put the money where image and where status and where all these things converge, and they just cash in on whoever is the most marketable. Back in those days, they would stick with an artist, and they stuck with Eddie Money through the dark period, and it paid off because in the early to mid 80s, Eddie would certainly mount a great comeback, and he would continue that mojo right until the music industry decided to cancel everybody because, well, we don't want this kind of music out there, you know? So this album came out in 1999. It was on a small record label, which became part of the whole BMG distribution. And then I believe it merged with another label. Needless to say, all of that label merging didn't work out so well. And the promotions for basically what this record label would do, they would sign older artists who couldn't get on the radio anymore because of the grunge apocalypse that was still in progress. And it was a place for fans like me who at that time weren't all that old. You know, I wasn't really that old, and I would have appreciated if music like this got on the radio. Now, I found a really cool review over on Amazon of this album, and it was written in 2004. And let me read this to you because this is great. Person says, before I start this review, I have to ask this question. Why doesn't this album appear as part of Eddie Money's discography when you do an Amazon search for this artist? Lately, many bands that were successful in the 80s have been releasing new material, from Journey and Styx to Bon Jovi and Def Leppard. Eddie Money released this album 5 years ago, before these other artists came back to their senses to make good music. It was also an unpopular move considering the musical tastes that were prevalent in 1999. However, this album is like a beautiful rose among the repulsive fields of thorns that are still blossoming in the music industry. This is written, of course, in 2004. The album is a modern throwback to Eddie's style, hard rock with just a little grit combined with pop sensitivity. The sound is definitely classic, and the songs are very well written, almost as if Eddie never stopped writing music. The album immediately kicks off with Ready to Rock. The song is a basic rock masterpiece, good for cruising in your car during a hot summer day. The next song, and this is one of my favorites, is Don't Say No Tonight. Here you can definitely hear the residual songwriting from Eddie's 1985 hit, Take Me Home Tonight. The songs are not the same, but they have similar patterns. Still, it is a classic song worthy of increasing the volume and jamming to. Other good songs consist of Let It Go, Need a Little Rock, So Cold Tonight, and Broken Down Chevy. Besides the first two songs, there are two other fantastic rockers that are my favorites. It's Gotta Be Love and When You Gonna Satisfy Me. By the way, Satisfy Me, just a little history lesson here, is a song from the mid-1980s done by a group called Billy Satellite. The original song is spectacular. Eddie's version of it is very good, but the Billy Satellite song is actually one of my favorites. It's always been in my sort of lost classics folder. Anyway, the former song starts out with an excellent guitar riff, then blasts out into a classic rock style to make you want to dance. The review goes on and on. As usual, the album was not promoted universally, but it is definitely worth spreading around and telling people about it. It is yet another shining example that rock and roll continues to progress further into the new millennium. The problem is that very few people commented on that. 2 people did. And 2004, at that time, people were like, hey, did you hear this? I didn't even know this came out. I mean, 38 Special, they released an album toward the end of the 90s too that was really, really good. I mean, phenomenal music and nothing, crickets. I think they actually charted a song, got as high as like number 33 at Mainstream Rock before some program director probably walked in and said, we don't play 38 Special. What are you doing? And that was the end of that, most likely. But what's mind-blowing is that the reviewer here kind of captures the essence of everything. The music industry, it wasn't just me getting older. The music industry collapsed. And a bunch of so-called smart people in corporate boardrooms just signed off on it and said, this guy, he's washed up. I mean, come on. I mean, not even for adult contemporary radio. A lot of the music that we listened to during the 80s, which was on a rock station in the 80s, showed up on AC stations in the 90s, which was weird. I remember when I heard Hit Me With Your Best Shot for the first time on AC radio. And I was like, that's not adult contemporary. Have you heard that guitar solo? But, you know, as times change and tastes change and people's senses change, and think of it this way, compared to the mind-numbing noise that you'll hear on mainstream rock, and this was happening back in the 90s, obviously, you would turn on Pat Benatar, any song by Pat Benatar could be Hell Is For Children, right? And it would be soft rock in comparison, even though it's still up-tempo, at times loud, with great guitar work. It's like, again, the goalposts being moved or the Overton window shifting. But, you know, people forget, like in the 80s on rock stations, they would play I Want to Know What Love Is. Do I think necessarily that should be on the radio a lot on mainstream rock in the 80s? Yeah, I think they should focus on the more up-tempo stuff, but it basically crossed over. It was such a big song that it was everywhere. And I think what people miss is this idea that rock and roll can be sung in the car. It can make you feel good. It's not always negative. It doesn't have to feel heavy and dark. And this record was a shining example of that. Again, it's called Ready Eddie by the late, great Eddie Money. And if you don't have it in your collection, you should try to find one, all right, before they're all gone. Because, look, I'm sure they're out there in discount bins, yard sales, flea markets. I don't know how many of these they actually pressed. I'm thinking not that many. I don't know. I haven't seen the download for this anywhere. There are a few tracks from the album that have been uploaded to YouTube, but the quality is a little sketchy. And when I put this in the CD player, there was a big difference as far as the audio quality of it. Frankie Sullivan, who I have mixed feelings about, he was the mastermind behind this. I liked Frankie Sullivan back in the day. It's just that I don't know if he's a very good band leader or band manager, especially these days. But, you know, as far as a writer and a guitarist, teaming up with Eddie Money, I think really worked out well for both of them, because it showed that Frankie could write without Jim Peterick, and it showed that Eddie still had plenty of gas in the tank. this would be kind of the swan song for Eddie Money, even though he released an album of cover tunes, I think in like 2010 or something like that. And then he had music that was coming out right at the time where he passed. And a couple of those songs got out. And I'm thinking that there probably is more material that is, not out there, hasn't been released yet, but maybe it will be released at some point. So in any event, here's the album they don't want you to hear by Eddie Money, or they didn't want you to hear. They certainly have no plans on re-releasing it or doing anything to honor this music. And you'll find plenty of albums like that throughout rock history where you just kind of furrow your brow and you say, this should have been all over the radio, and yet it was ignored. And there's a reason for it. And if you want to talk about it, join Patreon. It's $1 a month, and we can have good conversations about this kind of stuff. This is really in my wheelhouse as far as how the music industry really kind of picks winners and losers. And what they did in the early 90s is not only did they pick winners and losers, they just literally turned the spigot off and said, no more. You guys aren't doing this cheesy rock anymore because we don't like it. And it wasn't cheesy. It was good. It was up-tempo. It was fun. You could listen to it in your car. You could work out to it. You could do whatever you wanted to do. Nowadays, I think you have to go to counseling if you listen to too much of the stuff that you're hearing on the radio, because it's just so dark, depressing, and even, I hate to use this word, but a little demonic. It just doesn't feel right. And it's been 30 years of this, and no wonder we're in the state we're in politically and philosophically and religiously and all the different indicators of Western civilization. It's all kind of collapsing in on itself. And culture is a big reason as to why. So that's it. That's my video. A little too in-depth, maybe you think, for this, but this is where I go these days. I'm going off on tangents, and I appreciate all of you who continue to support and watch this channel, and I will see you soon.